This video that you're about to see may be one of the most upsetting videos that you've ever seen. It's in reference to a bizarre idea, but in reality it's even worse than a bad idea. And that is the potential of weather control. Weather control as in not only creating storms, but moving storms, stopping storms, preventing rain, causing drought, and even the possibility of creating earthquakes. Not done with seeding or chemical applications like they had attempted many years ago. That's not the case. It's electronics. Electronic manipulation of the weather. Sounds pretty spooky, and as a weapon, it would be possibly the most devastating weapons ever created. Because what we're talking about here is being able to control, manipulate entire nations by the force of weather without even sending a single, let's say, a military person into an area. About a year ago, when I spoke before the United States Senate, when we were testifying, a handful of us, patriots out here, that were invited by the Senate to come forward and speak relative to terrorism and the creation of the militia movement and the patriot movement across the country. And of course the intent of those people that were doing the questioning, if you will, the senators, their basic intent, of course, was to ridicule the American patriot, to mock us, make fun of us, destroy our credibility, make us look foolish or make us look crazy in the eyes of the general public. And the intent was, of course, that once they had accomplished that feat, then we would, of course, diminish in numbers and maybe just dry up and blow away. That maybe the Americans would look at a handful of representatives of the patriot movement and just say, well, there's a bunch of screwballs there, a bunch of crazy people or radicals or whatever the case may be, and we certainly don't want to associate with them. So it would have been potentially the end or the beginning of the end of the patriot movement. Of course, those folks that were able to watch and see that presentation done by 5 of us at that time, a year ago in June, that was not what happened. And an interesting point came up that is really what has generated this video. And that was Senator Cole. Senator Cole addressed myself directly. And what the senator asked me at that time was, Mr. Fletcher, a while back you made a statement to the United Press International that the government, persons in government, actually had means to control the weather, and that they would control the weather and put us into the New World Order by destroying our crops and food, etc. And the Senator Cole said, what do you mean by that, Mr. Fletcher? And I want you to watch this brief bit of video footage right here.
Said that you told the Associated Press that the American government has created weather tampering techniques so that the New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans and to control the rest. Would you explain what you were trying to say?
Just about every river in northwestern Oregon is near or over flood stage. At least 9 Oregon counties have been declared disaster areas, and thousands have been forced to evacuate. Toppled trees into the roadways, isolating entire communities, and more rain is expected.
What did you mean by that, Mr. Fletcher? An interesting thing had happened, a couple of years ago. I had heard about the potential of weather control. And again, we're talking, actually it's a means being done by electronics. And it was an interesting point, but since I've always been a real stickler as far as what I wanted to speak about or what I would dare talk about, I didn't want to even get into that very far unless I had some real good documentation. And as I said, a couple of years ago, people had sent me bits and pieces that looked like the possibility of that this was real, that weather control was real. But I didn't know much about it, and since I was so totally involved with so many other projects, I didn't zero in on it as a target, so to speak. And then an interesting thing happened. I was going through a book that was published by the United Nations, actually. This UN book was it's a kind of a list of the treaties that they had accomplished, the different things that the United Nations claimed to be real good moves for themselves. And it was a, patting themselves on the back type of a publication. As you can see here, this is the publication I'm talking about. And it's actually the titled Basic Facts About the United Nations. And I was going through it and just trying to see some of the ridiculous junk that they've been putting on us behind our backs that they in fact thought was a real good deal. And I noticed that they had an amazing group of treaties. It's several pages that sort of did a one paragraph synopsis of treaties that had been signed by the United Nations. And son of a gun, in 1977, I discovered that there was a treaty, as you can see here in this paperwork, there was a treaty that specifically said, they brought all the nations together in 77, now this is 20 years ago, that said that basically now that we can modify, create, and alter the weather, we have to agree that we as nations will not use it as a weapon of war. Now, not only did it say that basically that we now have the ability to do this, so we have to agree not to use it against each other, sort of like chemical, biological agreements, and of course nuclear. And of course they're all pretty ridiculous agreements because, we're talking about making agreements with our potential enemies, and yeah, right on, folks. They're not going to use this against us now that they know how to do it, all right? It's just absolutely ludicrous, but nonetheless they do carry out these exercises in futility on a regular basis. But they also, in this definition of the treaty, it said not only creating a modification of the weather and environment, but the creation of earthquakes and tidal waves, as well as the modification of general weather and environment. Now that's pretty heavy. Now, of course, as when I spoke to senators and congressmen and some other folks that are uneducated, and you bring up the concept of weather control, of course they say, well, that's ridiculous, Mr. Fletcher. And then I had somebody that contacted me and said that only God could change or alter the weather. Well, I wish that were the case, because then I certainly wouldn't worry about it. We would have to also assume that only God can split atoms and create atomic bombs and biological weapons and things that kill us and do electronic mind control, things of that sort. So I wish that was a fact, and unfortunately that's not the case. It was contact the United Nations and to get a specific copy of the treaty that they had put together that would prohibit the use of the military use of weather control, creation and generation of earthquakes, etc. And it was interesting because what I did was I called the people at the UN, and I got a hold of a very nice, cooperative little lady on the phone, and I told her what I was looking for. And since at that time I was doing some investigation for a particular congressional office, I told her that I was working, putting together a report that was going to go to the congressional office, and that we needed this particular, the text on the treaty to not use weather control as a weapon. So I had the date, it was a specific date in 1977, and the title on it, and she punched it into her computer. Well, she got back to me very quickly in just a moment or two, and she says, "Sir, I don't have anything on weather control and that particular weather modification or that treaty for that year. I don't seem to have that." So without batting an eye, since I did know it was their own publication, so I knew that it was a reality, I said, well, it could be that it's not for general public domain. I said, if you will, since we want to use this as part of a report to the United States Congress, if you don't mind, punch it up, go into it later on, go into your memory banks, the separate computer system that you had. I said, you'll find it, and I reiterated the exact date that the conference took place, and gave her the title once again. She wrote it down, and I gave her my phone number, which at that time I was still in Montana. And a short day, I guess it was maybe 3 days later, I received a phone call from this lady, and it was funny because at that time I was still in the militia of Montana offices, and I answered the phone, militia of Montana, and there was a hesitation on the line, and this lady said, well, I'm calling from the United Nations for Mr. Fletcher. I said, well, this is Mr. Fletcher, and she said that I knew who she was right away, and of course she said, who did you say you're working with? And I said, well, I happen to be in Montana right now, but we're putting together this report for the Congress. So that made her feel better, and so she therefore said, well, I do have the information you wanted on the conference, the United Nations conference on prohibiting use of weather control. So she sent it on to me, and as a matter of fact, she interestingly asked me, she said, are you going to need the legal, I'm trying to think of the terminology used, the legal certification of that treaty? And I said, certainly, we needed to have the legal certification, not knowing really what that meant, other than, obviously, if they send you the paperwork, it took place, you know, so, so she sent the entire paperwork to me on the convention. She additionally sent to me in both French and English from the legal department of the United Nations the actual legal certification of the date, time, etc. on it. So what we have here, according to us, to the Senate and Congress and other people, are folks that will look you straight in the face and say, well, the idea of weather control, creation of earthquakes electronically and all of that's absolutely ridiculous, Mr. Fletcher, or anyone else that might ask it. However, we find out that our nation 20 years ago actually went into an entire convention that said, now that we can do it, we promise that we won't use it against other countries. Well, unfortunately, that promise does not include using it against ourselves here in the United States. So, again, when Senator Cole had asked me what it was that I meant, inferring that the New World Order persons will utilize it as a weapon against us, that was what I meant. I pursued a little farther beyond the basic, the information on the convention, and a friend of mine said, well, you know, there's patents on that equipment. And as you can see here, he's absolutely right. These are the papers, the paperwork of the actual patents done on the electronic means by which electronic waves or rays, if you will, can be utilized to block, stop, move, alter, change, completely block off and divert or whatever the weather. It includes creating lows, creating storms, expanding them, generating, and even generating ELF low frequency vibrations that actually can move Earth in the ground itself and possibly generate or slide and expand the possibility of earthquakes. So this is actually the patents on that equipment. So all of this is based on the brilliant discoveries of Nikola Tesla, who was a man that lived 75 years ago, actually the fellow that tapped into, created, or if you will, discovered the application of alternating current, the AC current that we use when you throw on your light at the house. It is a Nikola Tesla discovery, if you will, or a means by which to channel that and use it. This fellow was apparently an amazing person. If you want to find out more about it, at the end of this video, I will give you information to where you can find out extensive information relative to Nikola Tesla. But the very equipment that's being used presently, covertly, secretly, in a multitude of outrageous experiments and programs right now, the application of magnetics, electronics, electronic waves, and what have you, is all come off of the original Tesla experiments. Nikola Tesla, I guess one of the most upsetting applications of it now is even mind control, which I will briefly get into towards the end of this tape, but it's the electronics application to alter people's personalities, even do it from a distance, as in just aiming an instrument at somebody and causing depression and a variety of other mental disorders or personality traits. Well, let me get farther into what took place. After receiving and finding, getting our hands on the actual patents for the equipment for weather control, I expanded my own circle of contacts and with people out of Washington, D.C., and I asked some of my friends in the Congress and the Senate and a few other areas up there, what is the story with this? This is mind-boggling. And I said, here we got people on the left hand who tell us we're crazy to even talk about it, and then I find that we have patents, etc., on the equipment, and I put out feelers all over the country, and I started receiving a variety of information. An amazing point was sent to me by a friend of mine, and that was that Senator Claiborne Pell, who's a high-ranking member of the the Senate Intelligence Committee, for many years, has been in the Senate for many, many years, some 20 years ago had written this story that you see right now on the screen. Well, the senator wrote a story relative to what I'm talking about, and that is application of electronic weather control as a weapon. He points out in his own story, in his own words, very specifically, again, remember this is 20 years ago, that we now can create tidal waves, create earthquakes, and create and maintain and alter other weather areas, whether it's a storm, expanding storms, or whatever. As you can see here in this particular story. Right now, now we have a high-ranking member of the Senate Relations Committee, Foreign Relations and Intelligence Committee, and he's talking about the use of weather control as a weapon. He also pointed out that, in fact, we had already used it, and it had worked well in flooding torrentially Cambodia, Laos, and during the Vietnam War. We used it as flooding as an application to flood the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and it worked very good. We bogged them down there, and then we were able to come in on top of that, of course, and bomb them, etc. So we used it as a weapon of war ourselves during the Vietnam War. Well, other folks contacted me and said, one gentleman wrote me, I think it was from California, and said, Bob, there is actually paperwork, an ongoing standard form in the United States government that's called an initial report on weather modification activities. This is a form that you fill out when you're planning to go out and screw up the weather. This is a government form, as you can see it right here, and you can clearly read what we're talking about here. All right? This is an initial report on the weather modification activities, and this is done under the Department, at that time anyhow, the Department of Commerce. And by the way, this is only 10 years ago. This is 1986 when this particular form was lifted and sent to myself. So here we go again. You have the Senate, the Congress, and these characters telling us that we're crazy, and they have regular government forms that we're going to fill out prior to creating an earthquake and destroying half of California, or whatever their plan for the day was. Now, I found out that a few years ago, as a matter of fact, what I want to do now is I'm going to go through a chronology of events that has led up to what we have now, which is a very sophisticated means of electronic generation of storms. If you will follow this along, and we'll point out the highlights for you relative to actually a chronology of what's taken place. As far back, as I mentioned to you, in 1977, they of course had done the convention. Now I want to trip through a handful of amazing points for you. In September of 1989, in the Washington Post, they ran a story. Now this is 89. They ran a story, and it was a coverage of a high-level meeting that took place in Tokyo on global environment. The speech by the president of the World Bank was rather amazing. It was Barbara Conable, C-O-N-A-B-L, made this statement. She said, while higher global temperatures may cause a number of disasters, they may also warm the colder, unproductive areas of the north of the globe and move those areas into a more productive status. Now, this statement was coordinated with the fact that the New World elite had already been warming the atmosphere in the most northern areas of the globe. And that was in 1989, after at least 20 years of global experiments with warming the atmosphere, shooting electronic rays, if you will, into the ionosphere and altering the temperature, etc. So when we get talking, and these people are synthetically warning us about stupid things like you use too much deodorant with hairspray or something like that in the morning, and you're going to end up warming the globe, they need to stop fooling around electronically with the ionosphere, because that's where the serious global warming is coming from. They set up 2 months later, in November 1989, a list of specialty GWEN towers, this is ground wave emergency network towers, was put together by a group of scientists, and I was able to receive those while we were up there in Montana. And we have here, as a matter of fact, just very briefly, I'm going to show you this. This is a locations of many, not all of them, but many of the GWEN towers that can cooperatively function as transmission towers or transmission points to assist in altering the weather. The GWEN towers, of course, are being told, we're being told that this is a ground wave emergency network system, that if in fact there's an atomic attack, for example, that this system will function and they'll still be able to communicate. Well, I've looked at many good photographs of Hiroshima, and I have some kind of a gut feeling that the GWEN tower system will not be working very well if in fact we have a nuclear attack in the United States. So I believe that may possibly be obviously another one of their smokescreens. Now, these systems, as a matter of fact, would be knocked out, according to scientific experts, by strictly the electromagnetic impulse immediately behind any kind of a nuclear blast. It will totally wipe out, not only if there's anything still standing, which of course is very questionable, but it would, by the electronic impulse alone, it's just going to do a total wipeout of anything that potentially would be of an electrical communication device. So it's almost ludicrous that they're pulling this on us and telling us that that's what this is for, right? Now, interestingly enough, back in the 93 floods, in 1993, in the Midwest, after these GWEN towers were put up, some of the very center points where they had done some of the very first GWEN tower constructions was where we had the unbelievable 1993 floods that totally wiped out huge areas of the United States and the farm areas. Now, the system they used is similar to what the Russians had done, which was called the woodpecker system. The woodpecker system, it actually got its name because when people would hear the system turned on, that the Russians were using over here, actually, if you will, as a weapon against ourselves, it made the sound, the rapping noise, electronically like that of a woodpecker, so it got the slang term hung on it as called the woodpecker system. And what it does is alters the magnetic fields in localized areas. And by doing that, it actually stalls or blocks off weather fronts. So if you have a system running through a country, across the country in a given direction, by putting up this electronic alteration of the magnetic fields, it actually can stop it off and either have humidity, for example, back up and drop to an extensive amount of rain in an area, or channel it off so that it'll curve and go off into an opposite direction, and which obviously by doing that, for one thing, you can create droughts. As you can see here, droughts, not only in the United States of America and in foreign countries, are unbelievably devastating. We presently, for example, have obviously the real terrible weather. A few of the locations of these towers were announced out directly, and I will give a few of those. It's Mechanicsville, Iowa, Ledyard, Iowa, Chelsea, Wisconsin, Shepherd, Minnesota, Curryville and Dudleyville, Missouri, Whitney, Nebraska, and several locations in Montana and Colorado, where the GWEN towers are profusely set up and can function well in conjunction with the huge facility that's in the Alaska area. It was formally announced that the ice cap regions in the Arctic had begun a serious melting around 1976 and 77. Well, now, that's real curious because this was not only the time when the Russians had started their first weather control modifications and electronic alterations of the atmosphere and weather controls, but it was the same year, 1977 was the year of the United Nations first convention for the prohibition of the use of these controls for military use. The Washington Post, January the 28th, 1990, ran a story by a British scientist that had discovered this major event. 15% of the entire ice cap had melted in a period of 10 years. That's an amazing 115,000 square miles of ice had melted all of a sudden. And again, it corresponds directly to the period of time when the Russians had started shooting their own, forgetting our disgusting under-the-table operations, the Russians had already started profusely bombarding us with their weather control equipment. What this does, and I'll get a little more into the technicality part of it later on, but basically it's a heating device. In 1990, in June, the magazine titled Progressive Magazine did a large expose report on the Gwen Towers, explaining that the towers have as many as 100 copper wires fanning out from the base of the towers underground. And they test the Gwen Tower transmissions every hour of every day. Now, a frightening effect of such electromagnetic transmission tests would be the effects of electromagnetic radiation of people and the animals that are close by, which is another whole separate concept introduced by the top secret programs of MK Ultra, which was the electronic mind control and operations of scientific experiments carried out for years by our own secret government in the United States, in hospitals, unsuspecting civilians, military personnel, and this electromagnetic application to actually alter, change, and make people crazy in some cases was done profusely, secretly by MK Ultra. Although the frequencies of the Gwen system is slightly different from that of the Russians' weather control, as the system is allowed to grow, the New World Order will be able to fine-tune this thing. As I mentioned before the Senate, they will be able to fine-tune their variety of electronic equipment and be able to totally control, simply at will, the weather in the world. Now, in Russia, this is mind-boggling when I found this out, and it's supported totally by standard media, if you will, which surprised me as well, because as it stands now, the media doesn't want to get into any of this very much. But in Russia, for several years, they've actually been renting, leasing, and selling weather control by electronic equipment to the farmers in Russia to control small areas over their own farms. Now, a fellow named Dr. Becker, who's an expert on biological magnetism, pointed out in a book that he had written, which was titled The Perils of Electropollution, how the effects of electromagnetics and the excess thereof could affect mental and physical health of people. And in the New York Times, it was admitted that the snow cap at the North and South Pole was shrinking away. Back in 1991, July the 4th, they ran a story in the New York Times and said that from some strange reason that the scientists over here couldn't figure out, both the caps were shrinking and melting, and of course they blamed it on general global warming without pointing the finger at the electromagnetic applications of the HAARP and Gwen programs. In 1991, in the Alaskan Daily News, they ran a story on the operations in Alaska about the brilliant light shows that were taking place in the skies over Alaska. And this is, in fact, the HAARP, High Altitude Aurora research program. That's what it's labeled. This is the heart of the control, the electronic control of weather and the creation of earthquakes. Now, as you can see here, this is the very location in Alaska of the bulk of the transmission equipment. This is some 40 to 50 acres, as far as the eye can see, of nothing at all but transmission amplifiers and transmission antennas. And this is the HARP program. Now, the HARP program is run jointly by the United States Navy, and of course it's maintained as a point of secrecy. You know, it's a typical what we call encapsulation of the project. As you can see, the actual entrance here, it says HARP Research Station, and this is in Gagona, Alaska. This is a high-frequency, active Aurora research program. It says that it's managed jointly by the Air Force and the Navy. And of course, they claim that they're simply doing research on the Aurora Borealis. So what they've done here is created this giant multi-million-dollar operation to see why the sky lights up in pretty colors. And again, for some reason, I find that a little hard to imagine. Again, if you look at these, you can see these this variety of photographs that we have here that actually shows the physical location and the ridiculous amount of transmission antennas that are set up at the HARP location. Now, to get back to some of the actual exposure of this information that has erroneously, I'm saying that erroneously relative to the fact that the media would prefer that we don't find out about these things. But in the Alaskan Daily News, 1991, they pointed out that the effects of 10 million megawatts of discharge from the HARP programs is what was taking place in 91. 10 million megawatts of power. Again, this goes back to Tesla's original experiments. And Tesla himself was scared that his discoveries and his inventions would be used in the wrong direction. He even pointed out 75 years ago that if the application of his low-frequency controlled waves, frequency waves, were misused, that he literally, or someone, he said that he even had the ability back then, that he could split the earth in half by sending low-frequency electronic waves into the earth itself and actually vibrating it and expanding the vibration such that it would actually crack the entire earth open. So that was his concern, and it's my concern now as to the application of weather control and earthquake generation. The scientists involved had admitted that they had success in creating the ELF, the extra low frequency waves, the ground through the ground, and in similar success in energy beams throughout the alteration of the ionosphere. Now this is where we get back again, once again, as I can show you here, the actual patents on this equipment to alter the ionosphere and then cause control and heating and control of weather. In 1992, the government's own description of the HARP program in their own specification manual, that manual number, by the way, is SSHAARP-02. They describe the, and state in this paperwork that they are creating and transmitting ELF, extra low frequency waves, by superheating the ionosphere currents. That's part of their own information. And either at either equatorial locations or in high altitude auroral locations. That's one of the reasons specifically, as a matter of fact, for locating the HARP up in Alaska, is that it's even the gas in the atmosphere is appropriate for conductivity, as you saw that amazing little demonstration at the very beginning of this tape, that amazing releasing of energy and the leaping of energy through the sky or through the air there. That is actually a gas contained within a globe, and that actually is energy particles illuminating these gases. That's what you're actually seeing. Is not what you would call an electronic spark, but an agitation and illumination of the gas itself. And that's part of what we're talking about. But it transmits the power. And again, I'm going to show you this part. Right now, I want to point this out to you. You can see here, here's the globe that I'm talking about. And if you'll notice, I'm going to put up next to it a fluorescent tube. This is a small fluorescent light tube like you would have in your home. Amazingly enough, what you're seeing is the illumination without any conducting wires whatsoever, by just being near this generator, this little power generator. We actually are illuminating and lighting up the fluorescent tube. This is the same principles that they're using to heat up the ionosphere and alter and control the weather. It's the same premise. And as you can imagine, General Electric and these guys that are sucking in those big bucks every month from you for your electric bill, the last thing in the world they want you to know about is Tesla's original concept 75 years ago of how you could get free electricity transmitted through the air, through the ground, and just turn appliances on and wouldn't cost anybody anything. No transmission cables. All these stupid wires all over the country wouldn't even have to be there. Uh-oh. That would mean a lot of money out of the pockets of these characters. So don't hold your breath on that one any more than you should hold your breath on whether it's going to be sunshiny tomorrow afternoon either. Now the idea is to heat and modulate the lower ionosphere, which in turn modulates the upper ionosphere. And this modulation creates, again, we're talking about what you're seeing with this globe, what it creates, in effect, a giant virtual antenna in the ionosphere. This synthetic, naturally based antenna can be used as an antenna for the radiation of radio and microwaves as well. Part of the program that they would be developing with this, and it's also part of the original patents that I showed you earlier here. The concept is multifaceted. Not only can it be used for mind control, for example, which is terrible, and the control of weather, which is terrible if you're using it as a weapon, but additionally, they will be able to transmit. They do two things. They could block off an entire, let's say the enemy's transmissions, radio, television, whatever, completely block those transmissions off. And in the very wave that they're sending out to block everything else off, they can transmit their own signals on that wave. So again, from a military point of view, that's pretty slick. You can go into an area, block off all communications, and utilize that same wave to send your own communications on. So that part of it's pretty neat. But again, as usual, what we're seeing here is mankind in general, whether it's Russians or Americans, the bad guys running the business, and they end up using it as a weapon against us. Now, the actual statements that were made recently in conjunction with the HARP program and how it was set up and how it meshed and interfaced with the Russian Woodpecker project, their transmission, in the Washington Times on March 29th, 1992, they reported that the ELF, these extra low frequency waves, conducted to earthquakes, or connected to the earthquakes, was showing up all over the world. Well, again, you know, it doesn't mean anything at all. You say, well, extra low frequency waves, they picked them up just before earthquakes. Well, maybe it's this or maybe that, maybe it's a scientific phenomenon. But both satellites and special ground wave detection devices had been picking up these unusual activities in and around the major quakes areas in Southern California. In both 1986 and in 87, in the Armenian earthquake, a huge one, in 1988, and then once again in the Northern California quake of 1989. Well, what's really surprising is that myself in California, while I'm being in Los Angeles, we had an earthquake just a short time ago. All right, this is in May of 1996. And what we're talking about was the fact that many people reported in that earthquake, it's small, it's just a 3.5 or something like that, but several people had reported that there were actually a shock explosion similar or identical to what we would call the breaking of the sound barrier, a shock explosion that rattled the area a few minutes before this earthquake. Well, and then of course the low frequency vibrations picked up and accordingly reported in regular press for several years, right in conjunction with earthquakes. Well, then when you go back into the Tesla information, this brilliant scientist, you find out that when he was doing his experiments, the release of energy, just when he reached a point where they were building up to release this unbelievable energy release that they were creating, that just at that point several things happened. One is that there was an explosion type of an effect similar to genuine lightning, if you will. That huge explosion that you hear with a big strike of lightning, and it was literally the release of energy at that point in time. That's exactly what these people were hearing just prior to earthquakes. Sorry about that. This has nothing to do with anything else other than weather control. As a matter of fact, just watch this here just for a moment.
Large modern cities can be struck down in a matter of seconds. This could be Los Angeles, San Francisco, Tokyo, or any city close to a plate boundary. On the night of the quake, 300,000 people became homeless, in addition to the 5,400 who died. 180,000 buildings were destroyed. 1 million people were without food and without water. The cost in cash was $147 billion. The problem cannot be ignored.
Additionally, for example, when we're talking about these energy releases, which is the sonic boom effect, and even electronic releases, for example, in Athens, Greece, you've got to remember this, and when we talk in terms of world control and New World Order and the weather control, this really is a world problem. Obviously, we're concerned about our own situation, but the reality is the New World Order, the one world control, the mind control of people, the military aggressive training, our local police, the increase in unconstitutional laws and those types of things, and weather control is a global problem. In Europe now, sidebar here, just a little sidebar, for example, in Europe now, the laws in England now is that you cannot group together in a meeting of larger than 8 people without having a permit. So be watching for that here in the United States. What's wrong with that picture? It is a global problem. Now, in Athens, Greece, the university there, which has real good seismographic and testing devices, picked up these same strange vibrational type explosions prior to their earthquakes. There's 6 out of 7 of the earthquakes of any concern in Greece in the last few years had the advanced extra low frequency vibrations detected immediately prior to every one of the quakes. The patents in that Eastland transmitter, based on Tesla's old works, states that this concept would work to modify the weather at command. That's in the patents. And the interference with air transmissions of signals, and even to expand into the possibility of concentrated laser beams, which is something that we'll cover on a separate videotape relative to the secret weapons that they've been putting together. The strange colored atmospheric discharges that take place in conjunction with these low-frequency electronic discharges prior to both strange storm movements in the atmosphere and along with the earthquakes are really amazing. About a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, I was driving back with other people from the militia from Seattle, where we had actually gotten stuck We'd gone to Seattle from Montana. We had done a presentation, and it was one of these, boom, over in a couple of hours, there was this bizarre snowstorm that came in to Seattle, dropped like 1.5 feet of snow in a short period of time, and it had even locked us in. Many people couldn't even get out and couldn't move about, and it was rather devastating because it was like very instant. It was an unexpected snowstorm. And when we were driving back the following day, we were driving back going east through some of this continuing snow, that I'm talking huge flakes, kind of a, you know, overnight, or not even overnight, but in a few hours, huge accumulation. And we couldn't believe it because we saw one of these energy releases ourselves. And of course, we're always telling everybody else to make sure you have a camera with you, and of course we didn't have one, so I have to cop out on that. But we watched and we saw a lightning type release of energy shot from the ground up, then became what one would describe as a flame like from a candle at the top of this spike. And then it slowly expanded into the atmosphere itself, and it was basically blue. It was a blue spike and a release of energy. This is identical to what Tesla, again, described in his energy release and the related experiments. Now, if you look here, this is a story where regular scientific news were trying to figure out why these huge energy releases of blue spikes are taking place all over the United States at the higher level of the atmosphere and the ionosphere, and that airplane pilots, for example, and the military are checking, are seeing them. They don't know what they're from because they're not part of the program, folks. And the legitimate scientific community, as you can see in this little story here, that scientific community is questioning what's going on here with these electronic releases. They have no idea what they are. You have a better idea what they are by the end of this videotape. In March of 1996, there was an earthquake, by the way, one of thousands in Southern California. It was a 4.6. The reports on the television, which I had mentioned to you earlier, were that there were loud, audible booms, sonic booms, a few seconds before the quake. Now, again, what's interesting is that it was, in fact, put on regular media, and hopefully you can get a look at this right here. This is some of the news coverage on that very earthquake we were talking about. This is a 4.6 in Southern California. Can you imagine how upset would the Japanese be if they thought that the quake in Kobe, you can see some of the destruction here from the Kobe quake. Can you imagine if they thought that the Kobe quake was generated by someone? So an interesting thing happens besides the general losses, but what takes place in a port that was a major industrial port and a shipping point, etc., for Japan, when Kobe, Japan was destroyed instantaneously with this devastating quake a short time back. As you can see, some of the footage, the footage I have here on this earthquake is just devastating in Kobe. But what took place is the transmission, the shipment of all the goods and materials. The economic base was instantly moved from Kobe to another port, or other countries took up the slack on things that were to be shipped. We're talking billions and billions of dollars in goods and materials that one area of the world was set to ship has now been transferred, and somebody else has got the benefit of this earthquake. So we instantly realize, of course, that the idea of earthquakes and weather control is economics. Economics, that's the point. Now, the original holder of several of these patents, that was Dr. Eastland's that I pointed out to you, and I'll throw these back up on the screen so you can see these once again. In those originals, he stated that he did not think that the government had accomplished, this is recently, Mr. Eastland had stated that he didn't feel that the government had accomplished the necessary antenna concept to transmit the magnification of the waves in his original paper. However, he's not been with the owners of the new patents for quite a while. And guess who it is? It's ARCO. the Atlantic Richfield Company now owns these patents. ARCO has been notoriously involved with covert, secret, black development operations for years and years and years. Anytime somebody has something that can be applied as a weapon, ARCO or one of these other 2 or 3 major covert operative operations, companies that deal in covert weapons, for example, they grab them up, buy them up, get rid of the original guy that put it together, and then run on secretly to expand on the program. So, son of a gun, here we go again. We find out that ARCO, which, as I said, been involved with so many scurrilous activities, including mind control, biological, chemical weapons, and all of that, they now are the holders for the Eastland patents. In another patent that's related to the same patents that we're talking about, was done by Simon Rameau. This is a patent number 4,712,155, December the 8th, 1987. In this patent, the outline is completed for the electronic interference and potential alterations of the protective magnetic field surrounding the Earth. This could cause not only weather changes, but catastrophic alterations of nature's balance. This is again one of these things, the old story about it's not nice to fool with Mother Nature, and we are witnessing some of the, let's say, effects of fooling with Mother Nature at this time. In the New York Times, March the 31st, 1992, a report about the magnetic field of the Earth was done, pointing out that the magnetic poles have most likely switched or reversed several times in the lifetime of the Earth previously. Right? And we're talking even going back prehistoric times. We're talking the switching of the negative and positive charges of North and South Pole, which of course the ramifications just in regular nature are beyond our wildest imagination. I mean, you couldn't even, there's no way to even imagine what would happen with that instantaneous polar, the possibility of the ice age coming back again, for crying out loud, very likely from something like that. And the switching, which just could be devastating, for example, with every electromagnetic field on Earth. We're talking videotapes, transmission tapes, radio, television, every single electric motor. Just we forget about. You throw the switch on for something, it runs a motor, it runs on, that's what it is, negative and positive polar circulatory movement on magnetism. Well, what happens when the whole thing's shifted, folks? I don't know, you'd slam everything into reverse, it would blow probably every electrical motor-driven device on Earth simultaneously. Whew. That's pretty heavy. By the way, this is a release in the New York Times, March 31st, 1992. Transmitters and even magnetic storage of all the information of every bank computer and everything that's on magnetic tape would be erased. Potentially, that's a possibility. One of the greatest press releases that I've ever come across in relative to this fooling with the weather, as it relates to weather control, was done in 1992 in the New York Times, September 24th. By the way, I'm giving you these dates for the folks that just have to have more evidence than what we can give you here. Go to the library and drag these newspapers out for yourself. Look it up yourself, read the stories so that you know that it's not something I made up this afternoon. It's the New York Times, 1992, September 24th. They did a story about the Russians, so what I briefly mentioned earlier, the Russians selling the weather electronic equipment to control the weather over their own farms and ranches. 1992. And the follow-up was done in the Wall Street Journal, October the 2nd, 1992, and it stated that in Russia, the technical company called Elate, that's E-L-A-T-E, Intelligent Technologies, Inc., Elate Intelligence Technology, Inc., was selling the use of weather controls. Elate has on its business cards, weather made to order. Now let's see What was it that Senator Cole said? Let's look at that one more time.
On April 21st, you said that you told the Associated Press that the American government has created weather tampering techniques so that the New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans and to control the rest. Would you explain what you were trying to say?
Well, what I was trying to say is exactly what I said. There is weather control techniques. We have a complete package on that, which I did not bring, but I certainly will see to it that it is brought in for the record. Number one, the entire patents on the equipment. Number two, Senator Claiborne Pell's complete statement and story of his own that not only does it exist, but that we even utilize it as far back as the Vietnam War. You might want to touch base with Senator Pell.
I just want to repeat before I turn to...
So yes, but we do have all that information.
You're saying the government has created weather tampering techniques so that the, quote, New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans.
Worldwide.
Millions of Americans, and to control the rest.
Yes, sir, and that's my belief. As bizarre as that sounds, if somebody had told me that that equipment even existed 10 years ago, I would have thought they were nuts, sir. And at this point in time, we have all the documents to prove it. And if you think that 85 tornadoes takes place in the middle of our growing area by simultaneous accident, I'm sorry. With the equipment that's already set up internationally, and as bizarre as that is, it is proven and documented. We will supply you with those documents. As bizarre as that is, I would say that weather wars, and this is quoting actually Senator Claiborne Pell himself, that they are the greatest weapon ever created in the world, and that's the Senator's own statement. So yes, I do stand on that.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cole, what I said is what I meant. To get back to this amazing company, this is a Russian company that's selling weather control, folks. 1992, exposed in both the Wall Street Journal and other New York Times and the major newspapers. The guy that runs this thing, and I'm going to say his name wrong, but then I don't care. His name is Igor Pirogov, or whatever it is. I don't have any idea. But he's the commercial director, all right, for this company that's called Alate, the technical company that sells weather. Listen to this actual statement made by the people in Russia that are controlling the weather and renting, leasing, or selling it off over there since '92. The director stated that Alate can fine-tune the weather pattern over a 200-mile square area for as little as $200 US per day. The 200-mile range, by the way, is exactly the standard range for the Gwen tower systems in the United States of America. I know, it's just another coincidence, Bob. Don't get excited about it. The Wall Street Journal, however, continued in their story and said that, quoting Mr. Pirogov, that the company can clear off areas of smog, divert typhoons, and chase away acid rain. He stated they could have changed the Hurricane Andrew, which, by the way, was did such an unbelievable amount of devastation in the United States. They said they could have changed the direction of that if they had wanted to do so and turn it into a small little squall. All right? The importance here is to note that the reverse, obviously, of that same situation certainly would be the truth. And that is that not only could you dwindle a storm down, but you could expand it, create it, double it, increase it, or magnify it, and that you, of course, according to them, divert it in any direction. Now, you have to remember what I had mentioned earlier, and that is that there was secret cooperative work between the Russians and the Americans going way back 20 years on this project. So it's not like it's just something that somebody else has out here and we don't have it or we are not using it. That's not the case. The head of this Alate company that controls or has the ability to control the weather from Russia, and again, this is part of that old original woodpecker signaling device and or control mechanisms. He said that he had described, and this is amazing because this is the guy's own words himself. He said, we have here at Alate what we would refer to as weather extortion For a high fee, his company can guarantee the weather conditions over an outside event. However, on the other side of it is that if you don't cooperatively come up with the fee, you will be rained out, or they will create a storm that would totally destroy an outside event, and he himself refers to it as weather extortion. The corporation location of this operation is just outside of the Moscow Vykova airport. There are dozens of antennas, 25 feet or more high. Again, I'm going to show you these pictures here briefly. This is, again, the locations of the similar antenna structure set up in Alaska. Amazingly, the controlled media, ABC television, did on the World News Now report in March the 8th of 1993, they did a live, what was shot live, at the location of the corporate weather control just outside of Moscow, what we were just talking about. It showed the antennas and the power source, and of course it's very, very small compared to the power sources that we really have. And what they were showing was, again, sort of maybe just a transmission point for the weather control, and this was again done in March 8th, 1993 on ABC television. All right, now, the power source producers at Gomel, Russia, G-O-M-E-L, for the serious weather control transmissions are the size of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. That's how big the real weather control generation system is, located just outside of Moscow. It's located at Gomel, Russia, G-O-M-E-L. Another important scientific discovery was released to the public in 1993. Now, we have to remember something, and that is that typically when something's released relative to an electronic, or not even electronic, but any type of a weapon device that's been created, or a new aircraft, or an amazing discovery, and even in nature, quite often, if it's something that we have secretly been putting together, they may have already had this thing, 25, commonly it's almost 25 years before they tell us about it. The stealth bomber was witnessed almost 20 years before they brought it out and told us that they were thinking about building one. All right, this is a typical situation in the secret government that we've allowed to be created here, and that is that these secret covert operations create weapons, create equipment, create materials or whatever, and then let you know about it. But in 1993, they came forward with an interesting release of information. This was Rheingold, a fellow named Reginald Newell from MIT, and he's in the Geophysical Research Department. And he stated that they had discovered, this is real important when we're talking about the flooding that's destroying the United States crops as we speak today, strange weather. This is real important. The Geophysical Research Department had discovered that there are what they refer to as literally rivers of vapor running in the lower atmosphere, and that the water flows in those atmosphere are equal, equal in actual volume to the Amazon River. That's their own terminology. So what we have are entire atmospheric rivers of vapor, and the cubic footage of volume humidity traveling past any given measured point is equal to that of the Amazon River. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And we'll get to making a real serious point about this, but climatologists have known for years that the vapor flows rise up into the atmosphere around the equatorial areas and then flow to the poles of both north and south as the magnetic flow, as they're actually drawn into that typical magnetic flow around the world from north to south, or south to north, depending the situation. And what they've discovered, follow this now, that, and this has been verified by satellites, as a matter of fact, that they verified the flow of 5 individual rivers of atmospheric water vapor flow. Now, again, you have to remember, as things, if you just look out on a foggy day, that's what you're looking at, is nothing but water vapors, all right? And it doesn't mean much unless it accumulates and groups up together, or is blocked off, or whatever, or even if you take your hand or a piece of metal, cold metal, to form some condensation, you'll run it through a fog, and you look on it, you'll have water running down the, because it's accumulated. But when you have the volume, they located 1.9 miles above the Earth and stretched out 4,500 miles, that there, and as much as 400 miles wide, rivers of vapor. Now, here's what happens, obviously. When you stop this off electronically, by altering either fooling with the electromagnetic fields, etc., or utilizing Tesla's concepts, you can block it off. Block off this river. Well, what happens? You know, if you just throw enough of it into one place and stop it off, it's going to start accumulating. It becomes rain. This is exactly what was done over the Mississippi River a short while back, when we had unbelievable 45, 60 days of continuous rain. That's what was done. They simply put up an electronic blockage with their equipment, block it, and maintain it. Now, if that equipment's not there, it just runs on and just stays, as we're going to refer to it as a cloud, but they refer to it as literally a river of vapor running at 5 miles above the, or 1.5 miles above the Earth. The volume, the flow of these vapor rivers has been measured at 165 million kilograms of water per second as they flow in their natural state. That's 340 million pounds of water per second in the atmosphere. And they simply have figured out how to block it, alter it, change it, direct it. You let it group up, you block it off like a dike, and it's going to fall and become rain. And if you do it for a long time, you've got major, strange weather all over the United States destroying the crops. With the application of the ELF generators, the low frequency, all right, they actually do these electronic jammings, all right, as you saw in 1993. In April the 8th of 1993, the Journal of Commerce and a commercial bulletin put out by the Journal of Commerce said, quote, "The idea of a joint operation between the Russians and the United States that would have Russian scientists working on related experiments in the alteration of the atmosphere would probably be a good idea." This is in 93. Now, here's what they were talking about. And that was that the Russians would come into the United States and work on the ultra top secret Lawrence Livermore laboratories in America, and that the project was an expansion of the old Tesla concept. In June of 1993, this is important, Les Aspin, head of the Defense Department at that time, gave the go-ahead for the Gwen Tower systems. This is almost within 2 months of this very same concept of the joint work between Russia and the United States. In theory, that system, of course, was for strictly the nuclear attacks. There's one problem when they talk about the Gwen Tower system, which is this baloney line that they're telling us that it's for a nuclear communication device in case of an outrageous attack on America. There's a big problem, and that is that sending and receiving messages, for example, compared to a fax machine, the Gwen Tower system is 80 times slower than a fax system. So they're completely lying to us on this one. It's got nothing to do with that. Again, it's Gwen Tower system, part of weather control. That's what it's for. Now, in the New York Times, it was reported on July the 10th in 1993 that there was a strange weather blockage that was keeping the rain down, blocking off the weather from moving and maintaining this huge amount of rain pouring down for over 49 days. All right, in Newsweek magazine, they also said, July 26, 1993, it was reported that an unusual shift of the jet stream acting as a barrier to the cold front had brought 150 to 200 more rainy days than normal to different areas. And in July of 1993, the New York Times reported that the flooding rain seemed to be locked in the Mississippi for over 6 weeks. And that, of course, is blocking off the humidity flow in the atmosphere. In August of 1993, it was reported that 1,000 levees had been breached and destroyed. And you're watching all of this video at the same time I'm telling you about this. This is some of the ridiculous flooding. In January in 1994, just a little while ago, a couple of years ago, in the Tulsa Reporter, the newspaper in Tulsa, there was a story about the CIA and the National Security Agency getting an award for their secret successful work at, guess what, the Livermore Secret Laboratories. And May 24th, 1994, the New York Times reported the rare weather that had plagued the country and that it was, quote, part of an altered worldwide pattern that most scientists do not understand. Now, again, we go back, what I mentioned earlier, these unusual electronic sprites, these explosions in the air. We have videotape here. I want to show you a little bit of this. This will show, again, some of the very same stuff that's happening here. And what happened, NASA has actually released this, showing that these peculiar releases of energy taking place. This is not a real good video, but we'll put it up anyhow. They actually released this from NASA. So here's what happens. We have the scientist community over here that's carrying out these secret operations. Then you have the rest of the science community. They don't know anything about it, so it's not like they're all teamed up against us here to keep this thing secret. That's not the case. But you have the action going here, and the guys over here that don't know a damn thing about it, and they come back and just say, well, this is happening, but we don't understand what's happening. Listen to your goofy weather person at night, right? And they'll say, gee, it's really strange. We're having this, we're having that. And we don't understand this. It was 40 below zero yesterday, and today we have sunshine. Everybody's on the beaches, and tomorrow it's gonna rain mixed with snow and sleet and hail. And then they say, oh, gee, this is really peculiar. You know, they just need to get out and study a little bit instead of having so many martinis at the end of the day. Spend a few hours following this stuff, and they'd understand what was going on. May of 1994, a major United States scientific magazine described large numbers of rare, strange blue flashes in the atmosphere. I want you to look at this video again. That were energy releases unknown to the science community. Well, these again are identical to what we've been talking about, Tesla's experiments. The same as the loud sonic booms that took place in June 18th of 1994. There was a deep quake in the earth. This is extremely unusual, an earthquake deep within the center, close to the core of the earth. It literally was 600 kilometers deep, according to the Scientific Research magazine. And it's extremely rare. However, if you go back, as a matter of fact, it was something like an 8.2, but centered inside the earth. And when you go back and you study Tesla's information, right? When you study the information of Tesla, you find out that in fact he stated way back 75 years ago, for crying out loud, that his equipment would have the ability to ring the earth itself, ring it like a bell, strike it and ring it like a bell. And that's exactly what the description was by the scientists just a short time ago on this thing that took place, an internal earthquake that shook the entire crust of the earth like a bell. It's almost used the same words. Later, in July of 1994, where the floods in Alabama had occurred, they were the worst floods in 500 years. And it's interesting, at this time was when, in that very same period of time, that they had done experimental beam laser shots from one of our satellites and also from our space shuttle cooperatively with some ground-based electronic equipment. Whether they're connected or not, I'm not sure, but during this period of time was when some of the most outrageous equipment, some of the most outrageous weather-altering modifications seemed to take place. Interestingly enough also that the Air Force, in September and October of 1994, in the Defense Daily Reports, the United States Air Force admitted that the studies on weather modification had done so well. Now, I want to put this back up again. I want you to look at this now. You'll notice the HARP installation in Alaska, where they have acres and acres of this equipment. It is run by the Air Force and the Navy, all right? In secret Air Force studies, they admitted that their studies of weather modification had done so well that it was now a permanent part of Air Force operations. The details of weather control are totally classified and are considered to be above top secret. And so there we go again there. What did Senator Cole say?
You told the Associated Press that the American government has created weather tampering techniques, that the New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans and to control the rest. Would you explain what you were trying to say?
Well, how does all this relate to you? How does it relate to your family? How does it relate to your family's future? How does it relate to the New World Order, those people that want to put us into a controlled society on the entire earth, into a controlled society where a few people will tell you everything what to do? Bill Clinton, as of this week, is recommending that all the United States, states, city, counties, etc., put together curfews so your children cannot be out past 8 o'clock. Bill visited California. He said he wanted all the school children to start wearing uniforms. That's another little trick. It's not a big deal by itself, but by the time you add all of it up, it is control. It is Orwellian. It is 1984, the New World Order, one world government. Read Orwell. They tell you what's going to happen. Spying on you, etc., etc. We'll get into that on another videotape relative to the secret weapons. The ultimate weapon, weather control, how does it affect you? This is the Wall Street Journal, May 22nd, just a couple of weeks ago. The headline right over here, drought. Watch some of this footage. We presently have the existence of a drought in the United States that may turn into the biggest, worst drought since the Dust Bowl, turning areas of the United States completely into a dust bowl. Other areas the farmers can't plant because it's flooded. This is brand new footage. Look at this. This is floodwaters right now. So what are we talking about? We found out, for example, the normal storage for grains, wheat, rice, and all the rest of it in the United States had always been 70%. What that means is they had that much flowing through the system at any time. They could shut off here and here, front door, back door, and we would have 70% of the ongoing potential crop for storage, for emergency. You know what it is today? According to my people, 8 to 14%, depending on what grain you're talking about. 8% dropped down from a 70% of retained grains. What happens now? Bear this in mind now. This is our storage. We have no crops planted. We have nothing growing now. As of today, there's nothing happening, folks. They haven't been able to put the corn in the fields. And if they don't get it in pretty quick, it's going to all be frozen and destroyed from cold weather because of the late planting. So let's figure it out, guys. That's what it's about. Control, weather control, United States of America, worldwide, but the United States of America control weather to destroy our crops and our food. How does it affect you? Next year, 9 months, 10, 12 months from today, there's not going to be any food. I hate to tell you this, guys. When you go to the grocery store, they don't grow that stuff downstairs. See, it has to be growing out here for next year, next month, 6, 8, 5 months down the line. We have to have the stuff in the ground growing. When you have floods, frost, hail, droughts, all over, depending on where you're at, and we can't produce product, this may be 1996 and 97 may be the first years in the history of the United States that's been recorded when we do not have enough food to feed ourselves. Now, an interesting thing happened. I want you to look at this. This was done a while back that talked about the fact that there's probably going to be less meat around. Well, see, now that's another problem. See, if we don't have grains and foodstuffs for the beef, we also are going to have a shortage of meat. We also, of course, had the disease. We had the mad cow disease. That's not reference to any of the people in the Senate and the Congress. Let's not get this mixed up. This is mad cow disease. They have a different disease up there. Okay, it's mad congressional disease. That's a separate thing, and it comes from too much martinis and a lust for wealth. It's a different problem. We address that in another tape. This is mad cow disease, pretty serious. It's wiping out all of the meats overseas. We've got it here, not too bad yet so far, but we do have other things. You're going to like this one, folks. The honeybees, not only honeybees, but the bees, the pollinating bees, are dying in the United States of America profusely. The report I have through somebody at the Commerce Department said the possibility of 80% of them are already dead. There's some kind of a little mite, a strange little mite that's gotten into the bee community. It's killing them. It's like a cancer for bees. Now, well, people say, well, gee, that's right, we can live without honey. That's not the point. These are the bees that pollinate all the rest of the vegetation out here. Now we have drought, floods, and a lack of pollination, no stored grains. By the way, we are still, of course, fulfilling our obligations to Russia and Red China and shipping them their grain. You need to touch base with your congressman. Look at this one. This is another nifty little thing. You can't read this. I apologize. This actually can't read it at all. But what it is a year or so back is a plan that they started where the United States Department of Agriculture would deploy the United States military to supply the foodstuffs for our schools. Somebody needs to explain that one to me. It's another little bit of control. But how does it affect you? It affects you not only in the, of course, storms, you know, like this storm that just took place. Again, now we're up to date right now. This just took place. This was unbelievable tornadoes popped down in the middle of the United States where they commonly don't have them. Wiped out almost 1,000 homes last week. 1,000 homes. Look at this footage here. Tornadoes. Well, not only do you have the financial burden of trying to rebuild these areas and all of that, but if we don't have any food next year, we're in trouble. Well, what's the solution? This is a huge problem we have, obviously, and the exposure of the problems is certainly the first step. The next step has to be, what can we do about it? Let me make a couple of recommendations. At the end of this videotape, I'll show you 2 800 numbers, free numbers. Won't cost you anything. Contact your senators, contact your congressmen, contact everybody's senator and congressman. It doesn't make any difference where you live. Contact them and just complain. And, ask them, say, hey, what's the story with the possibility of this HARP program as weather control? We want to, tell them, you want to declassify. You want the Air Force to declassify and the Navy to declassify the information because we want to know what's happening with our dollars and, in fact, are they changing the weather to destroy the future of our foodstuffs? Call these people. I'm going to give you those numbers. And what else can you do? Well, hopefully you're part of a good, active patriot group right now. And if you're not, develop one. Contact me. I'm going to leave a couple of numbers or a post office box where you can reach myself. Contact me if you'd like. I'd be glad to help you out if I can, aim you in a direction along with other people in your own area. But additionally, how about in your patriot group right now or your militia group, let's get a couple of people to go out and go to the libraries, dig this material out. We certainly can supply it. I'd be glad to supply. I have the entire report for you, a weather control report that has all these documentations. This is available to you. You can get them from us or go out to yourself, go out to the library or whatever, generate some of the same information for yourself. If you want to, drop us a note. It's a $10 donation for the paperwork on this, but you physically will then have it in your hand, and we'll be glad to send it to you. And what's your program? Get with the PTA of your schools. Get with the other people outside of your normal circle of friends. You know, we all have wonderful friends in the Patriot movement. Get with outside of that. You know, we keep talking to each other, we're going to go broke sending faxes to each other, right? All right, so let's not do that. Get with other people. Get with the PTA. Request that they watch this videotape. Show them this videotape at the Kiwanis Club, the Rotary Club, your business club. You know, everybody's affected by this. It's all over, folks, when we can't eat. So do something about it. Take your club, your group, your organization, go out beyond your own boundaries, take this videotape, and let people see this video. They have questions, they certainly can get back to us, but most of the questions, unfortunately, have been answered. Do something about it. Thank you.